Hi, everyone. With session 10, we begin to come back to looking at uh, a more normal presentation, I guess, in the PowerPoint stuff. Uh, I like the readings for this particular session a lot. And Mort Halpern, in particular, has been looking at the impact of culture and organizational behavior on the government organizations writ large, but in particular, the Department of Defense, the Department of State, the CIA, Congress, and other organizations for a very, very long time. So I think you'll like this session. Uh, the session really starts, I guess, with an idea that what we would like to think is that governments behave rationally. That is, they figure out a whole bunch of different options, they figure out which is the best one, and then they pick a solution based on some sort of cost benefit. A lot of this idea was derived from work that was done by Tom Schelling. And he talks about game theory, and he really is focused, I think, to a much greater extent than you might otherwise think about nuclear war and how governments behave with respect to nuclear war. And game theory basically suggests that rational actors wouldn't engage in nuclear war. The question for us and for you, I think, is whether or not this is really a good representation as to how the world operates. And in the late 70s and in the in the late 60s and the early 70s, people began to be really dissatisfied with the rational actor model because, frankly, it didn't explain how governments behaved. And in that time frame, a guy named Graham Allison wrote a book called Essence of Decision. He uses the Cuban Missile Crisis as an example, as a case study, if you will. And he comes up with ideas that, this doesn't really work that well. And he comes up with alternatives, which basically are talking about palace politics, bureaucratic behavior, and organizational process. In later years, he adds the idea of cognitive behavior, which is sort of the individual behavior within all of that. And it really fundamentally changes the way political scientists look at how governments make decisions. The book has been updated in recent years based on disclosure of previously classified material related to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he updates the book with one of his graduate students, Phil Zolikoff. But the Essence of Decision has been a mainstay, a seminal work within political science from when I was a junior in college, longer ago than I care to think, until today. In our work for this particular course, we really want to focus on organizational process. And what we want to understand is that the main actors are not individuals, is not a rational unitary entity, but are organizations with their own interests. And what that really means is that government is not a single rational actor, but really is a group of organizations who may or may not have exactly the same goals as they're going forward. To be fair, we create these organizations because no one organization can do everything. So we delegate authority for logistics, we delegate authority for operational planning and so on, so that we can actually gain some efficiency with expertise within each of the organizations. What this means is that there is a tendency for the primary control, the commanding officer, the combatant commander, the president, to lose control of what's going on in subordinate organizations beneath them. It's also important to remember that as we do this, we create a hierarchy, and that it's extraordinarily difficult for contrarian ideas to wend their way up through the hierarchy because the organization doesn't readily accept them. In fact, the organization, according to Halpern and many others, really will not accept ideas that are outside of its essence particularly. The slide here begins to show, I think, nicely what organizations do, and you can get this if you look at the Department of the Navy, and particularly just within the Navy itself, that you get the division of labor between the Airedales, the surface Navy, and the subsurface Navy, or the brown shoe, black shoe, and felt shoe navies. And what each of them wants and how they behave differently as they address the Navy writ large. So Halpern and Clapp really try to talk about the overall ideas of what's going on within each of these, and they identify the basic essence of each of the main military departments along with the CIA and the State Department. If we just look at the Navy and we look at how the Navy looks at its budget, we can see that it continues to focus really on control of the sea as we look at its shipbuilding program. The Navy continues to be somewhat resistant to building boomers, and they're resistant because boomers really don't do anything that helps them with control of the sea or surface or even some subsurface control. They want to build aircraft carriers and surface combatants and to a certain extent attack boats, but they would believe that the missile boats tend to be part of the strategic equation and not really a true part of what the Navy's mission is. You may find this kind of silly within the grand structure of stuff, but there is a lot when you enter a joint staff, a lot of that kind of idea that shows up again and again and again. So when you think about any organization, when you think about what it is that they're trying to do, this slide tries to outline some of the main things that are important to the organization. The one I want to call your attention to is the last bullet. I think that it's fair to say that budgets and the vigilance with which organizations look at their budget drive all of the other things, and that's where you really ought to try and focus your effort. The mandate of follow the money is true for organizational behavior as well as for any other kind of behavior.